The night Maylene Zhou's world shattered, she stood in a rain-soaked schoolhouse facing the most dangerous man in the territory. And he wasn't there to kill her. He was there to marry her. What happens when a desperate Chinese immigrant with a buried past accepts a marriage contract from a grief-stricken cattle baron? When his dead wife's ghost still walks the halls, when his sons have forgotten how to speak, when the entire town is watching and waiting for her to fail? This is a story about survival, secrets, and the brutal cost of starting over on the American frontier. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down like nails. Maylene Zhou stood at the window of the one-room schoolhouse, watching water turn the dirt road into a river of mud. The glass was old, warped at the edges, and through it the town of Deedridge looked even more miserable than usual, a collection of sagging buildings held together by stubbornness and spite. She pressed her palm against the cold pane. Her hand looked small there. Everything about her was small. Thin wrists, narrow shoulders, the kind of frame that made men assume she'd break easy. They were wrong about that, but she'd learned not to correct them. Being underestimated had kept her alive more than once. Behind her, the schoolhouse was dark except for a single oil lamp burning on her desk. The children had gone home hours ago, their voices still echoing in her head. "Miss Zhou, why do you talk funny? Miss Zhou, my pa says your people eat rats. Miss Zhou, Miss Zhou, Miss Zhou." She never corrected them either. The truth was simpler and worse than their questions. She was Chinese, she was alone, and she was one bad month away from starving. The school board paid her half what they'd paid the previous teacher, a drunk named Henderson who'd finally gotten himself killed in a card game. They'd hired Maylene because she was cheap and because nobody else wanted the job. She'd taken it because nobody else would hire her at all. A gust of wind rattled the door. Maylene turned from the window, pulling her shawl tighter. The stove in the corner had gone cold an hour ago. She was saving coal, stretching every penny until it screamed, but she couldn't bring herself to leave yet. The schoolhouse was warmer than her rented room above the general store, and at least here she could pretend she had a purpose. She walked to her desk and sat down, pulling out the ledger where she tracked her money. The numbers didn't lie, even when she wanted them to. Rent was due in 3 days. She had enough for that, barely, but then there'd be nothing left for food. She'd been hungry before. She knew the rhythm of it, the way your stomach stopped hurting after the second day, the way you stopped noticing the weakness in your legs until you tried to stand up too fast. She was running out of time, and she knew it. The door slammed open. Maylene shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. Rain and wind howled into the room, guttering the lamp. For a moment all she saw was darkness and the shape of a man, broad-shouldered and massive, filling the doorway like he owned it. Then he stepped inside and the lamplight caught his face. Colt Mercer. Even if she hadn't recognized him, and she did, everyone in Deedridge knew Colt Mercer. The way he moved would have told her everything she needed to know. He didn't walk into the room. He claimed it. Water ran off his long coat and pooled on the floor. His hat dripped steadily, casting shadows across a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and left out in the weather too long. Behind him, 2 small figures hesitated in the doorway. His sons. Maylene's heart was hammering, but she forced her voice steady. "The school is closed, Mr. Mercer." He didn't answer. He just looked at her with eyes the color of winter storms, and she understood in that moment why men crossed the street when Colt Mercer was walking down it. There was something dangerous in that gaze, something that had nothing to do with guns or fists, and everything to do with the kind of will that didn't bend. "Boys," he said, not looking away from her, "wait by the door." The children obeyed instantly. They were maybe 6 and 8 years old, dressed in clothes too fine for Deedridge, and they moved like soldiers following orders. Maylene caught a glimpse of their faces, pale, hollow-eyed, empty of anything that looked like childhood. Colt took off his hat. Water fell from the brim. "Miss Zhou." It wasn't a question. He knew her name. That shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. Men like Colt Mercer didn't notice women like her. They looked right through Chinese girls in worn-out dresses and kept walking. "Yes," she said. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Maylene stared at him, certain she'd misheard, but his expression hadn't changed. He looked the way you'd look discussing the weather or the price of cattle, flat, businesslike matter of fact. I don't understand, she managed. You're unmarried. Yes. No family in town. No. You're educated. You don't drink. You work hard. He said it like he was reading from a list. The school board says you're reliable. Maylene felt something cold spreading through her chest. Mr. Mercer, I don't... My wife died 8 months ago, he said, and for the first time something flickered in his eyes. It was gone so fast she almost missed it, but she'd seen it. Grief, raw and bleeding. Fever took her in 3 days. The boys haven't spoken since. She looked past him at the 2 small figures by the door. They weren't moving, weren't fidgeting the way children did. They just stood there, waiting. I'm sorry for your loss, Maylene said quietly. I'm not asking for sympathy. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. I'm asking if you'll marry me. You don't know me. I know enough. No. She shook her head. No, you don't. You came to Deedridge alone 2 years ago. You work 6 days a week for half wages. You live in one room above Henderson's store and you haven't missed a day of teaching since you started. He paused. You're surviving, but barely. Another winter like the last one and you won't make it. The truth of it hit her like a fist. He wasn't guessing. He'd asked around, done his research, treated hiring a wife the same way he'd treat buying a horse. What exactly are you offering, Mr. Mercer? A roof over your head, 3 meals a day, safety. He glanced at his sons, and 2 boys who need someone to care about them again. What would you get? Someone to run my house. Someone to give those boys what I can't. He met her eyes again. Someone to stand beside me when the town talks. They'll talk anyway, Maylene said. A Chinese woman married to Colt Mercer, they'll never stop talking. Let them talk. She studied his face, looking for the catch, the trick, the thing he wasn't saying. But all she saw was exhaustion, deep, bone-grinding exhaustion that came from carrying a weight too heavy for one man. Why me? She asked. There are a dozen women in this town who'd marry you tomorrow. None of them would do it for the right reasons. And I would? You'd do it to survive. Something that might have been respect crossed his face. That's honest, at least. Rain drummed against the roof. One of the boys shifted his weight, and the floorboard creaked under him. Maylene could feel the moment stretching, pulling taut like a rope about to snap. This was insane. She didn't know this man, didn't know what kind of husband he'd be, what kind of life she'd be walking into. He could be cruel, he could be violent, the whole thing could be some kind of trap. But the numbers in her ledger didn't lie, and winter was coming, and she was so tired of being hungry. I need to think about it, she said. No, you don't. Colt's voice was flat. You decided the moment I said the word safety. Everything else is just you trying to convince yourself you have a choice. Heat flared in her chest. I always have a choice. Then choose. He put his hat back on. I'll be back tomorrow night. You can give me your answer then. He turned toward the door, and Maylene heard herself say, Wait. He stopped. What would the terms be? Exactly. Colt looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, deliberate, like a man laying out the details of a contract. You'd live in my house, take care of the boys, run the household. In return, you'd have everything you need, food, clothes, whatever you want within reason. And you? What about me? What would you expect from me? As a wife, understanding flickered across his face. Nothing you don't want to give. We'd have separate rooms. This is a business arrangement, Miss Joe. I'm not looking for love. Then what are you looking for? Someone strong enough to survive what's coming. He glanced at his sons again. They need that. I need that. What's coming? Everything that follows when you tear down what's left of your life and try to build something new. His jaw tightened. The town will fight you. My late wife's family will fight you. Hell, my own house will fight you at first. It's been dead inside since Elizabeth went, and dead things don't come back easy. Maylene felt something shift inside her. Not hope. She'd learned not to trust hope, but something close to it. Possibility, maybe. The idea that she could be more than just the Chinese girl slowly starving in a room above a store. I need one thing clear, she said. What? If I do this, if I agree to this, I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I won't hide who I am. I won't make myself smaller to make your life easier. Colt's expression didn't change, but she saw something shift in his eyes. Good, he said. I don't want someone who'll break under pressure. I want someone who'll fight. Why? Because that's what those boys need to see. That's what I need to see. He moved toward the door, his sons falling into step behind him like shadows. Tomorrow night, Miss Joe. You'll have your answer by then. They were gone before she could respond, swallowed by the rain and the dark. Maylene stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, listening to the storm, and realized her hands were shaking. She'd told him she needed to think about it, but he'd been right. She'd already decided. The question was whether she'd have the courage to say yes when he came back. Maylene didn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed in the rented room, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried to imagine what her life would look like if she said yes. The Mercer Ranch was 5 miles outside town, a sprawling operation with more land than she could picture. Everyone knew about it, how Colt had built it from nothing, how he ran it with an iron fist, how he'd loved his wife with a ferocity that had scared people almost as much as his silence did. And now that wife was dead, and those boys were broken, and somehow Colt Mercer had decided that a poor Chinese schoolteacher was the answer to his problems. She rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. The room was cold. It was always cold. Even in summer, the walls seemed to hold on to winter like a grudge. What would it be like to be warm all the time? To eat 3 meals a day without counting pennies? To not wake up every morning wondering if this was the day she'd finally run out of options? But those things came with a price. They always did. She'd be walking into a house full of grief, taking the place of a dead woman, trying to mother children who'd been taught not to feel anything. And all of it under the weight of Colt Mercer's expectations, whatever those turned out to be. This is a business arrangement, he'd said. I'm not looking for love. Good. Neither was she. Love was a luxury for people with choices, and Maylene had learned a long time ago that she didn't qualify. A business arrangement she could handle. That made sense. That was something she could control. The lie felt comfortable, almost convincing. The next evening, she waited in the schoolhouse again, the lamp burning low on her desk. She'd spent the day teaching, going through the motions while her mind spun in circles. The children had noticed her distraction. Little Tommy Fletcher had asked if she was sick, and she'd told him no, just tired. Another lie, easier than the truth. The door opened at exactly the same time as the night before. No knock, no warning. Just Colt Mercer stepping inside with his sons behind him, water dripping from his coat. This time Maylene was ready. She stood up, folding her hands in front of her, and met his eyes. Yes, she said. He didn't smile, didn't show relief or satisfaction or anything else. He just nodded once, like she'd confirmed something he'd already known. We'll do it tomorrow, he said. The Reverend can come to the ranch. That fast? No point waiting. He studied her face. Unless you want time to... No. She cut him off. Tomorrow is fine. You'll need to bring your things. I don't have much. Doesn't matter. Bring what you have. He hesitated, and for the first time she saw something uncertain in his expression. The boys should meet you properly, before tomorrow. He gestured, and the 2 children stepped forward. Up close, Maylene could see the resemblance to their father. The same sharp features, the same gray eyes. But where Colt's face was hard, theirs were just empty. This is James, Colt said, putting a hand on the older boy's shoulder. And this is Thomas. The boys stared at her. Neither one spoke. Maylene crouched down, bringing herself to their eye level. She'd learned with children that looking down at them never helped. You had to meet them where they were. Hello, James. Hello, Thomas. Nothing. Not even a blink. Your father tells me you've had a hard time, she said quietly. I'm sorry about that. I know what it's like to lose someone you love. James's eyes flickered, just for a second, but she caught it. I'm not here to replace your mother, Maylene continued. Nobody could do that. But I'm going to try to help, if you'll let me. Still nothing, but Thomas took half a step closer, and that felt like something. Colt cleared his throat. That's enough for now. We should go. Maylene stood up. What time tomorrow? Noon. I'll send someone for you. I can walk. 5 miles in this weather? He shook his head. I'll send someone. It wasn't a suggestion. Maylene nodded, knowing a battle when she saw one, knowing some weren't worth fighting. Mr. Mercer, she said as he turned to leave. He stopped. What should I call you, after tomorrow? He looked at her for a long moment, and she wondered if anyone had ever asked him that before, if his late wife had called him Colt, or something softer, something private. Colt, he said finally. Just Colt. All right. She took a breath. You should call me Maylene. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. It was gone before she could be sure it had been there at all. All right, Maylene. Then he was gone again, his sons trailing behind him like ghosts. Maylene stood in the empty schoolhouse and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. The wagon came for her at 11 the next morning. The driver was a man named Cole, 50-something, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen everything twice. He helped her load her trunk, which was barely heavy enough to need help, and didn't ask questions. Maylene appreciated that. The ride out to the Mercer Ranch took an hour. The road was rough, cutting through scrubland and low hills that all looked the same. Rain had softened to drizzle, but the sky stayed gray, pressing down like a weight. Been working for Mr. Mercer long? Maylene asked. 12 years, Cole said, since before the boys were born. What's he like, as a boss? Fair hard, but fair. Doesn't ask anything of you he wouldn't do himself. Cole glanced at her. You're going into a tough situation, miss. Not going to lie about that. I know. Do you? He sighed. That house has been dying since Mrs. Mercer passed. The boss, he works himself half to death trying not to think about it. The boys, they just stopped. And the staff, we do our jobs, but nobody knows how to fix what's broken. And you think I can? I think Mr. Mercer thinks you can. And I've learned not to bet against him. They crested a hill, and Maylene saw it. The Mercer Ranch, sprawling across the valley below like a small town unto itself. The main house was bigger than she'd imagined, 2 stories of dark wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property, barns, stables, bunkhouses. Cattle grazed in distant fields, dark shapes against the gray land. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like everything else out here. Home sweet home, Cole muttered. They pulled up to the main house, and Colt was there, waiting on the porch. He'd cleaned up since last night, fresh clothes, hair still damp from washing, but he looked just as tired. James and Thomas stood beside him, both dressed in their Sunday best. Maylene climbed down from the wagon before Cole could help her. She smoothed her dress, the best one she owned, which wasn't saying much, and walked up the steps. You ready? Colt asked. Yes. The Reverend's inside. She followed him into the house, and the first thing that hit her was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the oppressive kind. The kind that settled into corners and made the air feel heavy. The house was beautifully furnished, expensive rugs, polished wood, paintings on the walls, but none of it felt lived in. It felt like a museum, like someone had arranged everything perfectly and then forbid anyone from touching it. This was what grief looked like, Maylene realized. Not tears and wailing, but this. A house full of beautiful things that meant nothing to anyone. The Reverend was waiting in the parlor, a thin man with kind eyes and nervous hands. He'd brought a Bible and a ledger for recording marriages. 2 ranch hands stood nearby, ready to serve as witnesses. Colt had thought of everything. The ceremony was short, mechanical. Maylene repeated words that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Colt's voice was steady as stone. The Reverend pronounced them married, and that was it. No kiss. No celebration, just papers signed and witnessed, making legal what necessity had already decided. Congratulations, the Reverend said, but it sounded like condolences. After he left, Maylene stood in the parlor with Colt and tried to figure out what happened next. The boys had disappeared somewhere. The house seemed even quieter than before. I'll show you to your room, Colt said. He led her upstairs down a hallway lined with closed doors. He stopped at one near the end. This was Elizabeth's sitting room, he said. I had it converted. He opened the door, and Maylene stepped inside. It was easily 3 times the size of her rented room, with a real bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk by the window. Sunlight, actual sunlight, breaking through the clouds, fell across the floor. Is it all right? Colt asked. It's perfect, she said quietly. My room's at the other end of the hall. The boys are next door to you. He paused in the doorway. Dinner's at 6. Someone will come get you. Colt? He turned back. What should I do? Until then, Whatever you want. It's your house now, too." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall, and Maylene was alone in a dead woman's converted sitting room, trying to understand how her life had changed so completely in less than 24 hours. She walked to the window and looked out at the land. Rolling hills and distant mountains, sky so big it made her feel small. Somewhere out there, her old life was still going on without her. The schoolhouse would find a new teacher. Her rented room would go to someone else. The town would talk for a week or two, then forget she'd ever existed. But here, in this silent house, with this silent man and his silent boys, she'd be impossible to forget. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to matter. Dinner was worse than Maylene had imagined. The dining room was enormous, the table long enough to seat 20. But there were only 4 of them. Colt at one end, Maylene at the other, the boys trapped in the middle like prisoners. A woman named Mrs. Grady served the food, an older lady with gray hair and suspicious eyes. She put the plates down with more force than necessary, and Maylene understood. She'd been loyal to Elizabeth Mercer, and she considered Maylene an intruder. Fine. Maylene had been an intruder her whole life. The food was good, roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, but eating it felt like a performance. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were silverware against plates and the occasional creak of the house settling. Maylene watched the boys. They ate mechanically, without interest or pleasure. Just fuel, nothing more. Their eyes stayed down, fixed on their plates. "How was your day?" she asked them. "Nothing." "James? Thomas?" James looked up briefly, but his eyes went straight past her to his father. Colt was watching her, his expression unreadable. Testing her, maybe. Seeing what she'd do. "I used to teach children your age," Maylene continued, keeping her voice gentle. "They always had interesting stories. Do you have stories?" Thomas's fork paused halfway to his mouth, but he didn't answer. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable, and Maylene felt the weight of it pressing down. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. She'd known the boys were grieving, but she hadn't understood the depth of it. They weren't just sad. They were gone. Hollowed out, running on empty. And Colt, he was watching it happen, watching them drift further away, and he didn't know how to stop it. That was why he'd brought her here. Not because he needed a wife or even a housekeeper, because he needed someone who might be able to reach them when he couldn't. The meal ended in the same silence it had started. Mrs. Grady cleared the plates with the same cold efficiency. The boys excused themselves without speaking and disappeared upstairs. Maylene stood up to follow, but Colt's voice stopped her. "Give them time." She turned. "How much time have they had already?" 8 months. "And it's working?" His jaw tightened. "No." "Then maybe it's time to try something different." "Like what?" "I don't know yet." She met his eyes. "But I can't help them if I don't understand what they need. And I can't understand what they need if you keep me at arm's length." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." She kept her voice level, matter of fact. "You've given me a room and a place at your table, but you haven't let me in. Not really. And until you do, I'm just another piece of furniture in this museum you've made." Colt stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might explode. But instead, something in his face shifted. Not quite a crack, but close to it. "Elizabeth was the one who knew how to do this," he said quietly. "How to make them laugh. How to make this place feel like home. I was always just the one who provided. And now she's gone, and I don't know how to be what they need." It was the most honest thing he'd said since they met, and it hit Maylene harder than she'd expected. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said. "I hired you to—" "I know what you hired me to do, but this isn't a business arrangement anymore, Colt. Not really. We're in this together now, whether we planned it that way or not." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. "All right," he said finally. "What do you need from me?" "Tell me about them. About Elizabeth. About what this house was like before." "Why?" "Because I need to understand what we're trying to get back to." Colt walked to the window, staring out at the darkening land. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like words scraped from somewhere deep. Elizabeth was light. That's the only way I can describe it. She made everything brighter just by being in the room. The boys, they were like that too, always laughing, always getting into trouble. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. She'd read to them every night, made up stories about cowboys and dragons and, I don't know, magic. What happened to her? Fever came through town. She went to help at the church, taking care of the sick, caught it herself. His hands curled into fists. 3 days later, she was gone. Fastest thing I've ever seen. One day she was fine, the next... He didn't finish, didn't need to. The boys watched her die, he continued. I tried to keep them away, but Thomas snuck in, found her in the last hours. She didn't even know him anymore. The fever had her so bad. He's barely said a word since. Maylene's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything. He turned back to her. I don't know how to fix them, Maylene. I don't know how to make them whole again. I just know I can't do it alone. Then we'll figure it out together. Just like that? Just like that. He studied her face, looking for something, doubt maybe, or fear. But Maylene had left those behind the moment she'd said yes. There was no point in them now. You're tougher than you look, Colt said. I'd have to be, wouldn't I? Something that might have been respect crossed his face. Yeah, you would. They stood there in the dim dining room, two strangers bound together by desperation and signed papers, and Maylene felt the first real connection between them. Not love that was still impossibly far away, but understanding. They were both fighting for the same thing, even if neither of them knew yet what that was. I should check on those boys, she said. Colt nodded. Their rooms are next to yours. James is on the right, Thomas on the left. Do they let anyone in? No, but they don't lock the doors either. She left him there and climbed the stairs, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The hallway was dark except for a lamp burning at the far end. She stopped at Thomas's door first and knocked softly. No answer. She tried the handle. It turned easily, and she pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Thomas was sitting by the window, still dressed, staring out at the night. He didn't turn when she came in. Thomas? Maylene said gently. It's Maylene. Can I come in? No response. But he didn't tell her to leave either. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room was neat, organized, empty of personality. No toys scattered on the floor, no drawings on the walls, just furniture and emptiness. She sat down on the edge of his bed, not too close, giving him space. I know you don't know me, she said quietly, and I know you're hurting. I'm not going to pretend I understand exactly what you're feeling, because I don't. But I lost someone too, a long time ago, someone I loved very much. Thomas's shoulders twitched. Not much, but enough. It feels like the world ended, doesn't it? Maylene continued. Like nothing will ever be good again. Like if you start talking, start living, it means you're forgetting them. He turned his head slightly, not looking at her, but listening. But you're not forgetting. You could never forget. Your mother is part of you, Thomas. She always will be. And I think she'd want you to keep living, keep being the boy she loved. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Thomas turned fully, and his eyes met hers, and she saw the ocean of pain in them. It hurts, he whispered, the first words he'd spoken in 8 months. Maylene's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. I know. It hurts all the time. I know, sweetheart. I know. He started crying then, silent tears running down his face, and Maylene moved closer, carefully, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. But he didn't. He leaned into her instead, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him while he shook. She didn't say anything else, didn't make promises she couldn't keep or tell him it would be okay. She just held him and let him cry, and that was enough for now. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red but clearer somehow. Can you stay? He asked. Just for a little while? As long as you need. She sat with him until he fell asleep, his head on her lap. And when she finally stood to leave, she found Colt standing in the hallway outside the door. He'd heard everything. How did you do that? He asked roughly. I didn't do anything. He did. He hasn't spoken in... I know. She looked back at the sleeping boy. Sometimes people just need permission to hurt, to admit it's not okay. Colt's expression was strange, something between grief and hope and fear all tangled together. Thank you, he said. Maylene shook her head. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go. But as she walked to her room, she felt something shift. Not victory, it was too soon for that, but the first crack in the wall. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, this broken house could be fixed after all. She just hoped she was strong enough to see it through. The morning sun woke Maylene before anyone else in the house stirred. She'd barely slept, her mind turning over everything that had happened with Thomas, replaying the sound of his voice breaking as he said, "It hurts." She dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing a simple work dress instead of the nicer one she'd worn yesterday. If she was going to live in this house, she needed to understand it, and understanding meant seeing it in daylight without pretense. The hallway was silent as she made her way downstairs. Every door was closed, every room sealed off like a tomb. She counted them as she passed. 1, 2, 3, 4 guest rooms that probably hadn't been opened in months. Elizabeth's mark was everywhere if you knew how to look. The embroidered curtains, the careful arrangement of photographs on the walls, the fresh flowers that someone, probably Mrs. Grady, still changed weekly in empty rooms. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and Maylene found Mrs. Grady already there, elbow deep in bread dough. The older woman looked up when Maylene entered, surprise flickering across her face before settling back into suspicion. "Didn't expect you up this early," Mrs. Grady said. "I'm used to early mornings." Maylene looked around the kitchen. It was bigger than her entire old room, with a massive cast iron stove and counters that went on forever. "Can I help with anything?" "Help?" Mrs. Grady's hand stilled in the dough. "Ma'am, you don't need to." "I want to." The two women stared at each other across the kitchen, and Maylene could see the battle happening behind Mrs. Grady's eyes. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. The lady of the house didn't come down before dawn asking to knead bread. "I don't bite, Mrs. Grady," Maylene said quietly, "and I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just want to be useful." Something in Mrs. Grady's expression shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. She nodded toward the counter. "There's coffee in the pot, cups in the cabinet above." It was a start. Maylene poured herself coffee and sat at the small table in the corner where the staff probably ate their meals. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, exactly the way she liked it. She wrapped her hands around the cup and watched Mrs. Grady work, the practiced rhythm of someone who'd been doing this job for years. "How long have you been here?" Maylene asked. 10 years come August." Mrs. Grady punched the dough with more force than necessary. "Since before the boys were born. So you knew Elizabeth well." The hand stopped moving. "Yes." "What was she like?" Mrs. Grady turned slowly, and her eyes were hard. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I need to understand what this house was before I can help it become anything again." "You can't replace her." "I know that." Maylene met her gaze steadily. "I'm not trying to. But those boys need someone, Mrs. Grady, and Colt needs help whether he'll admit it or not. That's why I'm here." "You're here because you needed a roof over your head." "Yes, that too." Maylene didn't flinch from it. "But now that I'm here, I'm going to do the job right. I'm going to try to help them. Whether you believe that or not is up to you." Mrs. Grady studied her for a long moment, flour dusting her hands, searching Maylene's face for something. Whatever she found made her shoulders drop slightly. "She was kind," Mrs. Grady said finally. "Mrs. Elizabeth. Kind in a way that didn't cost her anything because it came natural. She knew everyone's names, remembered their birthdays, asked about their families. She went back to the dough, but gentler now. This house sang when she was alive. You could hear it the moment you walked in. Laughter, music, the boys running through the halls. Mr. Mercer, he was different too. Smiled more. The weight wasn't so heavy on him." "What happened after she died?" "Everything stopped, like someone blew out a candle and forgot to light it again." Mrs. Grady shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. "The boys went silent. Mr. Mercer threw himself into work. The rest of us just kept going, because what else could we do?" Maylene took a sip of her coffee. "I got Thomas to talk last night." Mrs. Grady's hands froze. "What?" "Just a few words, but it's a start." The older woman's eyes went bright, and she blinked rapidly. "That boy hasn't said a word in 8 months. Not one." "How did you—" "I told him it was okay to hurt." "That's it?" "Sometimes that's all people need." Maylene stood up, carrying her cup to the sink. Permission to feel what they're feeling instead of pretending to be fine. Mrs. Grady wiped her hands on her apron, and when she looked at Mei Lin again, some of the hardness had cracked. Maybe Mr. Mercer was right about you after all. Maybe. Or maybe we'll both figure out I'm completely wrong for this job. Mei Lin smiled slightly. Either way, I'm here now, so we might as well make the best of it. The kitchen door swung open, and one of the ranch hands stuck his head in. A young man Mei Lin hadn't met yet, maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair. Mrs. Grady, you seen the boss this morning? Cole needs him down at the south pasture. He's probably already down there, Danny. You know how he is. Danny nodded and started to leave, then noticed Mei Lin. His eyes went wide. Oh, ma'am, sorry, didn't see you there. It's fine, I'm Mei Lin. Danny Pruitt, ma'am. I work the cattle mostly. He looked between her and Mrs. Grady, clearly uncertain what to make of the new Mrs. Mercer sitting in the kitchen at dawn. Welcome to the ranch, I guess. Thank you, Danny. He fled, and Mei Lin heard him talking to someone outside. Word would spread fast that the Chinese woman Colt had married was already breaking the rules, already acting strange. Let them talk. She'd spent her whole life being strange to people. The boys will be up soon, Mrs. Grady said. They eat breakfast at 7 sharp. Mr. Mercer's rules. What do they usually have? Oatmeal, toast, sometimes eggs if they ask. She paused. They haven't been asking for much of anything lately. I'll eat with them, Mei Lin said. If that's all right. It's your house now, ma'am. You can eat wherever you want. But the way she said it made it clear that Mrs. Grady still wasn't sure about that. Still wasn't sure this small Chinese woman in a work dress belonged in Elizabeth Mercer's kitchen, at Elizabeth Mercer's table, in Elizabeth Mercer's life. Mei Lin didn't blame her. She wasn't sure either. The boys came down at 7 exactly, James leading the way with Thomas behind him like always. They stopped short when they saw Mei Lin sitting at the dining table, a plate of oatmeal in front of her. Good morning, she said. James looked toward the kitchen, probably expecting Mrs. Grady to handle this. Thomas just stared at Mei Lin with those hollow eyes that had cried themselves empty last night. Come sit down, Mei Lin said gently. I thought we could eat together. They obeyed, taking their usual seats, but they moved like prisoners going to execution. Mrs. Grady brought their bowls, and the silence settled in thick and heavy. Mei Lin ate slowly, watching them from the corner of her eye. They were going through the motions again, lifting spoons, chewing without tasting, surviving, not living. Thomas, she said quietly. He looked up, startled. How did you sleep? For a long moment he didn't answer, and Mei Lin thought maybe last night had been a fluke, a brief crack that had already sealed itself shut. But then he said, voice barely above a whisper, Okay. James's spoon clattered against his bowl. He stared at his brother like he'd just spoken in tongues. I'm glad, Mei Lin said, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I slept well too. The bed is very comfortable. Thomas nodded slightly. James kept staring. What do you boys usually do during the day? Mei Lin asked. Lessons, James said suddenly, his voice rusty from disuse. With Mr. Patterson. Then, nothing. It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly, and Mei Lin felt that same crack widening, letting light in. Nothing sounds boring, she said. It is, Thomas agreed. What did you used to do? Before. The boys exchanged glances, and pain flickered across both their faces. Before meant when their mother was alive, and talking about before meant acknowledging what they'd lost. We go riding, James said finally. Ma would take us out to the creek. We'd catch frogs and stuff. I liked the frogs, Thomas added softly. Do you still go riding? Both boys shook their heads. Why not? Pa's too busy, James said. And nobody else, it's not the same. Mei Lin set down her spoon. I don't know how to ride a horse. They looked at her like she'd just admitted she didn't know how to breathe. You don't? Thomas asked. Never learned. Where I grew up, we didn't have horses. She paused. Do you think you could teach me? Something shifted in James's face. Not quite hope, but interest maybe. The first sign of life beyond grief. You really don't know how? Not even a little bit. It's easy, Thomas said. We could show you. I'd like that. Mei Lin stood up, carrying her bowl to the kitchen. After your lessons today, maybe we could go to the stables. if that's all right with you." The boys looked at each other, having a conversation without words the way siblings did. Then James nodded. Okay. It was such a small thing, such a simple agreement, but it felt huge, like the house had taken its first real breath in months. Maylene spent the morning exploring the house properly, opening doors that had been closed, pulling back curtains that had been drawn. Every room told a story. The parlor where Elizabeth had entertained guests, the library where someone had once read by the fire, the sunroom that hadn't seen sun in who knew how long. She found photographs everywhere. Elizabeth had been beautiful in a delicate golden way that made Maylene understand why people had loved her. In every picture she was smiling, radiant, alive. The boys looked like different children in those photos, open-faced, joyful, whole. Colt appeared in fewer pictures, usually standing slightly apart, but when he looked at Elizabeth, the camera caught something raw in his expression. Love, yes, but also wonder, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Maylene studied those photographs and tried not to feel like a fraud. She'd never be what Elizabeth had been, never inspire that kind of devotion or fill a room with light just by walking into it. But maybe she could be something else, something these broken people needed just as much. She was in the library when Colt found her, surrounded by books she'd pulled from the shelves, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. "What are you doing?" he asked from the doorway. "Opening windows, letting air in." She turned to face him. "This house has been holding its breath, Colt. It needs to breathe again." He looked around the library like he was seeing it for the first time. "Elizabeth used to read in here, every afternoon." "I know, Mrs. Grady told me." Maylene shelved a book carefully. "I'm not trying to erase her, but I can't live in a museum either. Something has to change." "The boys talked to you this morning." "They did." "Both of them." "Yes." He leaned against the doorframe, and she could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. "I don't know how you're doing this." "I'm not doing anything magical, Colt. I'm just present. I think that's all they needed. Someone who wasn't drowning in their own grief." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." She said it gently but firmly. "You've been drowning for 8 months, working yourself to death, keeping the boys at arm's length, sealing off every room that reminds you of her. That's drowning." His jaw tightened. "I'm keeping things together. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, everything's falling apart. It's just happening slowly enough that you can pretend not to notice." She expected him to get angry, to storm out, but instead he just deflated, walked into the room and sat down heavily in one of the chairs. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "How to be both parents, how to work the ranch and raise them and keep this house running and not fall apart myself." Maylene sat down across from him. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. I hired you to— I know what you hired me for, but it's bigger than that now." She leaned forward. "Those boys need their father back, Colt. Not the ghost who's been running this place on empty. They need you to show them it's okay to live again." "How am I supposed to do that when I don't know how myself?" "We figure it out together, one day at a time." She paused. "I told them I'd go to the stables this afternoon, that they could teach me to ride. Will you come?" "I have work." "Colt." He looked at her and she held his gaze, refusing to back down. "1 hour," she said. "That's all I'm asking. 1 hour with your sons doing something other than surviving." The silence stretched out between them, and Maylene could see him fighting it, fighting the idea of letting go even for a moment. But finally he nodded. 1 hour. The stables smelled like hay and horse and leather, familiar scents that made Maylene think of the few times she'd been around animals as a child. The boys were already there when she arrived with Colt, and they'd picked out a horse for her, a gentle mare named Daisy who looked at Maylene with kind, patient eyes. "She's good for beginners," James explained, suddenly animated in a way she hadn't seen before. "She won't spook or run off or anything." Thomas was already saddling another horse, his small hands working with practiced efficiency. "You gotta check the girth," he called over. "Make sure it's tight, or the saddle will slip." Colt stood back, watching, and Maylene caught the expression on his face, surprise mixed with something that looked like pain. He was seeing his sons come alive again, and it hurt because it reminded him of what they'd lost. "Okay," Maylene said, approaching Daisy carefully. "What do I do first?" For the next hour, the boys taught her everything: how to approach a horse, how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit properly in the saddle. They were patient and encouraging, correcting her mistakes without making her feel stupid, and Maylene realized this was the first time they'd had something to focus on besides their own pain. She was terrible at it, of course. She nearly fell off twice, pulled the reins too hard, sat too stiffly. But the boys thought it was funny instead of frustrating, and their laughter, actual laughter, filled the stable like music. "You're doing better," James said encouragingly after her third attempt at a turn. Ma was worse when she first started. The words came out naturally, without thinking, and then he froze. Looked at his father with wide, terrified eyes, like he'd just committed a crime. But Colt's expression was soft. "She was terrible," he agreed quietly. "Fell off 4 times the first day. Swore she'd never get on a horse again." "But she did," Thomas said. "Yeah, she did." Colt walked over to Daisy, adjusting Maylene's stirrup without being asked. She was stubborn that way. It was the first time he'd talked about Elizabeth without his voice going flat and dead, and Maylene saw what it cost him, saw the grief in his eyes, but also something else, memory that wasn't just pain. "You should ride too, Pa," James said suddenly, "like we used to." Colt hesitated, and Maylene could see the refusal forming on his lips. But she caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. "1 hour," she'd said, "that's all." He saddled his horse, a big black gelding named Thunder, and the 4 of them rode out together, slowly because Maylene couldn't manage anything faster. They went to the creek James had mentioned, where the water ran clear over smooth stones and cottonwood trees provided shade. The boys showed her where they used to catch frogs, talking over each other, arguing about who'd caught the biggest one. Colt dismounted and helped Maylene down, his hands careful on her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For making me remember it doesn't have to hurt all the time." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They stood by the creek while the boys waded in, boots abandoned on the bank, and watched the sun filter through the trees. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't healed. But it was something. That night at dinner, the silence was different. Still there, but not as heavy. The boys ate with more interest, and Thomas asked Mrs. Grady if there was any pie left from yesterday. "I'll check," Mrs. Grady said, and the smile on her face was real. After the meal, James lingered by the table instead of disappearing immediately. "Can we go riding again tomorrow?" he asked Maylene. "If you want to." "I do." He glanced at his father. "We both do." Colt nodded. "I'll make time." It was a small promise, but Maylene could see it mattered, could see James straightening up, some of the weight lifting from his small shoulders. When the boys finally went upstairs, Maylene started to follow, but Colt stopped her in the hallway. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right." "Elizabeth's parents are coming next week, from back east." His expression was grim. "They don't know about you yet, about us." Maylene's stomach tightened. "What will you tell them?" "The truth, that I remarried, that you're part of this family now." "They won't like it." "No." He met her eyes. "They won't. They've been trying to take the boys since Elizabeth died. Said I couldn't raise them properly on my own. This is going to make things worse." "Do they have a case? Legally?" "I don't know. Maybe." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Charles Burke, Elizabeth's father, he's got money and connections. If he decides to fight me for custody..." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Maylene understood the threat. "Then we make sure he doesn't have grounds to fight," she said. "We show him the boys are happy, healthy, that this house is a home again." "In 1 week?" "It's a start, isn't it? They're talking again, laughing. That's more progress than 8 months of silence." Colt looked at her like she'd just offered him water in a desert. "You really think we can do this?" "I think we have to try." He nodded slowly. "All right, but Maylene, they're going to say things about you, about us, about this marriage. It won't be pleasant." "I've survived worse than unpleasant words, Colt." "I know, but I don't want you to have to." The protectiveness in his voice surprised her. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a transaction, but somewhere between last night and right now, it had become something more complicated. "I can handle it," she said firmly. "The question is, can you?" "What do you mean?" Can you stand beside me when they're questioning your judgment, when they're implying you've made a mistake? When they're treating me like I'm not good enough to breathe the same air as Elizabeth? His eyes went hard. Yes. You're sure? Maylene, I chose you. Not because you were convenient or cheap or the only option. I chose you because I thought you could survive this, because I thought you were strong enough. He took a step closer. And I was right. So yeah, I can stand beside you. The question is whether you can stand beside me when my former in-laws try to tear this whole thing apart. She held his gaze, seeing the challenge in it, the dare. He was testing her again, pushing to see if she'd break. Try me, she said. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. All right then, we'll face them together. The week that followed was the strangest of Maylene's life. She threw herself into transforming the house, opening every room, washing every window, filling vases with wildflowers from the fields. Mrs. Grady watched with increasing approval, eventually joining in, and together they brought light back into corners that had been dark for months. The boys bloomed under the attention. They rode with Maylene every afternoon, teaching her more than just horsemanship. They taught her about the ranch, about the land, about the life they'd had before grief swallowed it whole. James showed her the old treehouse his father had built, and Thomas took her to his mother's garden, now overgrown but still beautiful. She planted roses, Thomas said quietly, touching a bloom. Red ones. They were her favorite. They're beautiful. Pa won't come here anymore, says it hurts too much. Maylene knelt beside him. Sometimes the things we love hurt the most, but that doesn't mean we should stop loving them. Thomas looked at her with those two old eyes. Do you think Ma would like you? The question hit her harder than she'd expected. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. I think she would. He picked a rose carefully, avoiding the thorns. You make Pa smile sometimes. She'd like that. Colt did smile more, though he probably didn't realize it. Little things, watching the boys race their horses, finding Maylene covered in dust after cleaning the attic, listening to laughter in the house again. The weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, redistributed so he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. They fell into a rhythm, the four of them. Breakfast together, the boys at lessons, Maylene working on the house while Colt managed the ranch, afternoons riding or exploring, dinner as a family, evenings in the library where Maylene read to the boys from adventure novels they devoured hungrily. It wasn't perfect. Thomas still had nightmares. James still went quiet sometimes, retreating into himself. Colt still worked too hard, still struggled to let go. And Maylene still felt like she was play acting, pretending to be something she wasn't. But it was better, and better was enough. The night before the Burkes were scheduled to arrive, Maylene couldn't sleep. She stood at her window looking out at the dark land, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She'd faced prejudice before, faced people who looked at her and saw only her race, her poverty, her foreignness. But this felt different, more personal somehow. A knock at her door startled her. Come in. Colt entered, still dressed despite the late hour. Saw your light on. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. He joined her at the window. They arrive at noon tomorrow. Charles sent a telegram. They're bringing their lawyer. Of course they are. I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they say, you don't have to take it. If it gets too much, you can leave the room. I'll handle them. Maylene turned to face him. Is that what you want? For me to run away when things get difficult? No, but I don't want you hurt either. I've been hurt before, Colt. I'm still here. She crossed her arms. You hired me to do a job. I'm going to do it. That means standing beside you tomorrow, no matter what they throw at us. He studied her face in the dim light. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone grateful, compliant. Someone who'd be happy just to have shelter and stay out of the way. A slight smile. You're none of those things. Should I apologize? No. His voice was rough. I'm glad you're not. We need your fight, Maylene, all of us, me included. They stood together at the window, two people bound by necessity who were slowly becoming something else. Partners, maybe, allies at least. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just quiet. The good kind. Get some sleep, Colt said finally. Tomorrow's going to be hell, but we'll get through it. Together? Together. After he left, Maylene did sleep, though not well. And when she woke to gray morning light, she dressed carefully in her best dress. Still simple, still plain, but clean and pressed, and prepared herself for battle. Because that's what this was going to be. A battle for this family, this home, this fragile new life they were trying to build. And Maylin Joe had learned a long time ago how to fight. The carriage arrived exactly at noon, black and expensive, pulled by matched horses that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Maylin watched from the parlor window as it rolled up the drive, her hand steady despite the knot in her stomach. Behind her, she could hear Mrs. Grady fussing with the tea service, nervous energy making her clumsy. Colt appeared at her side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You ready?" "No, but I will be." He nodded, and she caught something in his expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked to the door, and Maylin followed, forcing herself to stand tall, even though every instinct screamed at her to make herself small, invisible, safe. Charles Burke stepped out of the carriage first, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His wife Margaret followed, dressed in mourning black despite the months that had passed, her face drawn and pale. Behind them came a younger man carrying a leather satchel, the lawyer, no doubt. But it was the fourth person who made Maylin's blood run cold, Silas Whitmore. He shouldn't be here. Couldn't be here. She'd run halfway across the country to escape him, buried her past so deep she thought it would never surface. And yet there he was, stepping down from the carriage with that familiar cruel smile playing at his lips. Her legs went weak. The world tilted. Colt's hand found hers, hidden in the folds of her skirt where no one could see. "Breathe," he murmured. She did, pulling air into lungs that had forgotten how to work. Silas hadn't seen her yet. He was helping Margaret navigate the steps, but it was only a matter of seconds. "Who is that?" Colt asked quietly, reading her panic. "Later. I'll explain later." Charles was already striding toward them, his expression carved from ice. "Colt." "Charles, Margaret." Colt's voice was even, giving nothing away. "This is unexpected. You didn't mention bringing guests." "Mr. Whitmore is a family friend," Charles said. "He's been helping us with some legal matters back east. We thought his expertise might be valuable here." Silas looked up then, and his eyes found Maylin. For one heartbeat, two, his expression stayed perfectly blank. Then that smile widened, sharpened, became something predatory. "My dear Colt," he said, his accent refined, educated, dangerous. "You didn't mention in your telegram that you'd remarried. How wonderful. And who is this lovely creature?" Maylin felt Colt stiffen beside her, felt the anger radiating off him like heat. But she stepped forward before he could speak, extending her hand with a steadiness she didn't feel. "Maylin Mercer," she said clearly, "Colt's wife." Silas took her hand, holding it a fraction too long, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that made her skin crawl. "Charmed, I'm sure. Silas Whitmore, at your service." "Mr. Whitmore." She pulled her hand back, resisting the urge to wipe it on her dress. Margaret was staring at her with undisguised horror. "Colt, what is this?" "What it looks like, Margaret. I remarried." He moved closer to Maylin, a clear statement of solidarity. "Maylin's been wonderful with the boys. The house is—" "You married a Chinese woman." Charles's voice was flat, stating a fact like it was evidence of insanity. "Elizabeth's been dead 8 months and you married a Chinese woman." "Yes." "Have you lost your mind?" "No, I've been trying to put it back together." Colt's hand found Maylin's again, this time in full view. "Shall we go inside? I'm sure you'd like to see the boys." They moved into the parlor, and Maylin could feel the Burke's eyes on her, cataloging everything. Her simple dress, her foreign features, the way she didn't quite fit in this elegant room. Mrs. Grady served tea with shaking hands, and the silence was thick enough to choke on. "Where are James and Thomas?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. "Upstairs with their tutor. They'll be down shortly." Colt sat in the chair that had been his, gestured for Maylin to take the one beside it. "They're doing much better, talking again, laughing." "Talking?" Margaret's cup rattled against the saucer. "Thomas is talking." "Yes." Maylin helped. "Maylin," Charles said the name like it was something distasteful. "How long have you known my son-in-law, Miss—" "Maylin." 2 weeks." Maylene said quietly. We were married 10 days ago. The lawyer, a pinched man named Morrison, started writing notes. Silas just watched, that smile never leaving his face. 10 days, Margaret repeated. You've known each other 10 days and you married her? What about Elizabeth? What about... Elizabeth is dead. Colt's voice was hard. I loved her. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and the boys needed someone, and I needed help. Maylene was the answer to that. Maylene was convenient, you mean? Charles leaned back in his chair. A poor Chinese schoolteacher desperate enough to accept any offer. How much did you pay her, Colt? Heat flooded Maylene's face, but before she could respond, Colt was on his feet. Watch your mouth, Charles. Or what? You'll throw us out? We're Elizabeth's parents. Those boys are our grandsons. We have a right to ensure they're being raised properly. They are being raised properly. By a woman who's been in their lives for 10 days? Morrison flipped through his notes. Mr. Mercer, you must understand how this looks. A hasty marriage to someone completely unsuitable. Children who've been traumatized. The children are healing, Maylene said, finding her voice. They're happy. If you'd take the time to see them, we'll see them all right, Charles cut her off. We'll see exactly what damage has been done. The boys chose that moment to appear in the doorway, Thomas holding James's hand, both of them frozen at the sight of their grandparents. Margaret made a sound like something wounded and stood up, arms outstretched. My darlings, my poor darlings. Thomas took a step back, pressing against his brother. They looked scared, confused, and Maylene wanted to go to them, but didn't know if she should. It's all right, Colt said gently. You remember Grandpa Charles and Grandma Margaret? They've come to visit. Visit? Charles's voice was sharp. We've come to take you home, boys, away from this situation. This is their home, Colt said. Not anymore. Charles pulled papers from his jacket. We're filing for custody. Morrison has documented everything. The hasty remarriage, the unsuitable stepmother, the fact that you're clearly not in your right mind. Any judge will see that those boys need proper care. The room erupted. Colt was shouting, Margaret was crying, Morrison was citing legal precedents. And through it all, Silas just sat there watching Maylene with those cold, calculating eyes. She stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. Stop! Everyone turned to look at her. She could feel her heart hammering, but forced herself to stay calm, to think clearly despite the terror clawing at her throat. James, Thomas, she said quietly, go upstairs, please. The boys fled, and Maylene was glad. They didn't need to hear this. You have no authority here, Charles started, but she cut him off. I have every authority. I'm their stepmother, legally married to their father, and I won't let you use them as weapons in whatever game this is. Game? Margaret's face was blotchy with tears. You think this is a game? You think I want to see my daughter's children raised by some stranger who can't possibly understand our family? I understand grief, Maylene said quietly. I understand what it's like to lose everything. And I understand that those boys need stability, not to be torn from the only home they've ever known. You've been here 10 days, Morrison said. 10 days is not... 10 days in which Thomas started speaking again, Maylene interrupted. 10 days in which James laughed for the first time in months. 10 days in which this house stopped feeling like a tomb. Silas finally spoke, his voice smooth as oil. Very touching, Mrs. Mercer, truly. But I wonder, does Colt know about your past? About why you really came to Deedridge? The blood drained from Maylene's face. Colt looked between them, his expression darkening. What's he talking about? Colt asked. Nothing, Maylene said quickly. Oh, it's not nothing. Silas stood up, moving with predatory grace. You see, Charles, your concerns about this woman might be even more valid than you know. Before she was a school teacher in Deedridge, Mrs. Mercer had quite a different life. Silas, don't. Maylene's voice was barely a whisper. Don't what? Don't tell your husband the truth? Don't let these good people know what kind of woman is raising their grandchildren? He turned to Colt. Did she tell you she ran away from a brothel in San Francisco? That she was... That's enough. Maylene's voice cracked like a whip. You have no right. I have every right. You stole from me, girl. You took money that wasn't yours and disappeared in the middle of the night. I took what I was owed. Her hands were shaking now, rage and fear warring inside her. You kept us locked up, treated us like property, took every penny we earned. And now you found another man to take care of you, Silas said. Same pattern, different setting. How long before you rob him blind and run again? Colt moved so fast, Maylin barely saw it. One moment, Silas was standing there smirking. The next, he was slammed against the wall with Colt's forearm across his throat. Say another word about my wife, Colt said, his voice deadly quiet, and I'll break your jaw. Colt, please, Maylin grabbed his arm. He's not worth it. For a long moment, Colt didn't move. Then he stepped back, releasing Silas, who stumbled and clutched his throat. Get out, Colt said. We're not going anywhere, Charles said. Not until we have those boys. You're not taking them, Colt's voice was flat. I don't care what Morrison's papers say. I don't care what threats you make. This is their home, and I'm their father, and you're not taking them. We'll let a judge decide that, Morrison said, gathering his papers. Mr. and Mrs. Burke, I think we've seen enough. We should return to town and file the necessary— Wait! Margaret was staring at Maylin, tears streaming down her face. Is it true, what he said? Maylin wanted to lie, to deny it, to make it all go away. But she was so tired of running, so tired of hiding. Yes, she said quietly. I worked in a brothel in San Francisco. I was 15 when they brought me there, told me I was going to be a maid in a nice house. By the time I understood what I'd walked into, it was too late to leave. They took my papers, my money, everything. I stayed for 3 years trying to earn enough to buy my way out. When I realized that would never happen, I took what I thought I was owed, and I ran. The silence that followed was deafening. And you married her knowing this? Charles asked Colt. I didn't know, Colt said, his voice strained. She never told me. Because it doesn't matter, Maylin said desperately. That's not who I am anymore. I'm a teacher. I've built a life. You're a liar, Margaret said, and a thief. And you think you can raise my grandsons? I've been raising them, Maylin shot back. For 10 days, I've been the only one who could reach them, who could make them feel safe again. Where were you when Thomas was crying himself to sleep every night? Where were you when James stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped being a child? We were grieving our daughter, and they were grieving their mother. But they still needed someone to love them through it, and I did. I do. Maylin's voice broke. I love those boys. In 10 days, they've become everything to me. This is ridiculous, Morrison said. Charles, Margaret, we should go. The filing will be stronger if we don't engage. I have questions for Mr. Whitmore, Colt interrupted, his voice cold. About his business in San Francisco. About whether the establishment he ran was licensed. Whether his books would stand up to scrutiny. Silas's smile faltered. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that a man who ran an illegal brothel and kept women against their will probably has a lot to hide. And I know people in San Francisco, Whitmore, lawyers, judges, federal marshals. One telegram, and they could make your life very difficult. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. Colt moved to stand beside Maylin. You want to destroy my wife's reputation? Fine. But I'll destroy yours right back. I'll dig up every illegal thing you've ever done, every law you've broken, every woman you've hurt. And I've got the money and connections to make sure everyone knows about it. Silas's face had gone pale. You're bluffing. Try me. The standoff lasted several heartbeats. Then Silas straightened his jacket, that predatory smile returning but weaker now, uncertain. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Colt's voice was flat. You leave this ranch, you leave this territory, and you never come near my family again. Or I make good on every word I just said. Charles, Silas started, but Charles held up a hand. I think you should go, Mr. Whitmore. We'll handle our family matters without your assistance. Silas looked between them, his jaw working, and Maylin could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he grabbed his hat and stalked toward the door. You'll regret this, he said to Maylin as he passed. I already do, she said quietly, but not for the reasons you think. After he left, the silence was somehow worse. Charles and Margaret stood together, Morrison hovering nearby like a vulture, and Colt kept his hand on Maylin's arm like he thought she might bolt. I think, Charles said finally, we all need some time to process this situation. There's nothing to process, Colt said. Maylin is my wife. She's staying. The boys are staying. You can accept that, or you can leave. It's not that simple, Colt. The courts will side with the father, especially when they see how well the boys are doing. Colt's voice softened slightly. Charles, Margaret, I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you loved Elizabeth, and you love those boys. But tearing this family apart won't bring her back. It'll just hurt the children more. Margaret was crying again, quiet tears that carved tracks through her powder. I just want them to be safe, to be happy. They are. Come see for yourself. Stay for dinner. Spend time with them. See what Maylin has done for them. I don't know if I can, Margaret whispered. Try, Maylin said gently. For the boys. They need their grandparents too. It was a risk, offering that olive branch, but Maylin saw something shift in Margaret's face. Not acceptance, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. One dinner, Charles said, then we'll decide. It was more than Maylin had hoped for. She nodded, and Mrs. Grady appeared as if summoned, ready to show the Burkes to the guest rooms. When they were alone, Colt turned to Maylin, and the look in his eyes made her stomach drop. We need to talk, he said. They went to the library, and Colt closed the door behind them with careful control. Then he just stood there, his back to her, and Maylin could see the tension in every line of his body. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have told you. Before we married, I should have… Yes. He turned to face her. You should have. I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't want me if you knew. Afraid you'd see me the same way everyone else does. And how's that? Ruined. Dirty. Someone to be pitied at best, despised at worst. Colt ran a hand through his hair, and she could see him fighting for control. I don't care about your past, Maylin. I don't care what you had to do to survive. But I do care that you lied to me. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing. His voice rose and she flinched. He saw it and immediately gentled his tone. You let me walk into this blind. The Burkes could use this against us. Against you. They could paint you as exactly what I am. A former prostitute who married up to escape her past. That's not what you are, isn't it? She met his eyes. Be honest, Colt. If you'd known, would you have still married me? The pause was too long, and it told her everything she needed to know. I thought so, she said quietly. Maylin, it's fine. I understand. This was a business arrangement anyway, remember? You needed someone to take care of the boys. I needed shelter. Feelings don't enter into it. That's not true anymore, and you know it. He moved closer. Whatever this started as, it's changed. You've changed it. Those boys love you. This house feels alive again because of you, and I… He stopped, and Maylin's heart was hammering. You what? She asked. I don't know, he said roughly. I don't know what I feel except that the thought of losing you makes me want to tear something apart. And the thought that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth makes me want to… He trailed off, helpless. I'm sorry, Maylin said again. I wanted to tell you. 100 times I almost did. But I was so afraid of losing this. Losing them. Losing… me? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Colt closed the distance between them, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But instead, he just took her hands, holding them carefully. I'm not going to let the Burkes take the boys, he said. And I'm not going to let Whitmore destroy you. We'll fight this together. Together? That's what partners do, isn't it? A slight smile. Even when one of them keeps secrets? I won't anymore. I promise. Good. He squeezed her hands. Now we should probably figure out how to survive dinner with my former in-laws. Dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as Maylin expected. The boys were confused by the presence of their grandparents, uncertain how to act. Margaret kept crying into her napkin. Charles watched everything with judgmental eyes, and Morrison took notes like he was building a case, which he probably was. But something unexpected happened about halfway through the meal. Thomas dropped his fork, and when he bent to pick it up, he accidentally knocked his water glass over. It spilled across the table, soaking the tablecloth, and he froze with absolute terror on his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hey! Maylin was around the table in seconds, kneeling beside him. It's okay. It's just water. But Ma always said. He cut himself off, tears streaming down his face. What did your ma say? Maylene asked gently. That I had to be careful. That I couldn't make messes because she was too tired to clean them. His voice was so small. She was already sick and I didn't know, and I made so many messes, and maybe if I'd been better, she wouldn't have. No. Maylene cupped his face in her hands. No, sweetheart. That's not how it works. You didn't make your mother sick. You couldn't have stopped it. You were just a little boy being a little boy. But I should have been better. I should have helped more. I should have. Thomas, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Oh, Thomas, no. She came around the table too, kneeling beside Maylene, and Thomas looked at her with devastated eyes. You didn't do anything wrong, Margaret said. Your mother loved you so much. She would never want you to blame yourself. Then why did she leave? The question that had been eating at him for 8 months finally burst out. Why did she leave us? She didn't want to, baby. She fought so hard to stay. But sometimes people get sick, and no matter how much they love you, they can't fight hard enough. Thomas collapsed against his grandmother, sobbing, and Margaret held him tight, rocking him like she had when he was small. James was crying too, and Colt picked him up, and for a moment the grief that had been locked away for so long finally broke free. Maylene stood back, giving them space, and found Charles watching her. You did that, he said quietly. You gave them permission to grieve. They needed it. Elizabeth would have done the same thing. He cleared his throat. She would have liked you, I think. It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd gotten from him, and Maylene felt tears prick her own eyes. The rest of the dinner was quieter, gentler. The boys stayed close to their grandparents, and Margaret told stories about Elizabeth as a child, about the mischief she got into, the adventures she'd had. Slowly, the memory of her became less painful, more celebratory. When it was time for bed, the boys hugged their grandparents goodnight, and Maylene saw something in Charles's face shift. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement, at least. After the boys were asleep, the adults gathered in the parlor. Morrison had put away his notebook, and Charles looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. We'll drop the custody suit, he said finally. Charles, Morrison started, but Charles waved him off. I was wrong. The boys are healing here. They're happy. Taking them away would just hurt them more. Thank you, Colt said quietly. But we want to visit, regularly. We want to be part of their lives. Of course. They need you. Charles turned to Maylene. I won't pretend I'm comfortable with this marriage. I won't pretend I understand it. But I can see that you care about those boys, that you're trying to help them. I love them, Maylene said simply. Then that will have to be enough. He stood, Morrison scrambling to follow. We'll return to town tomorrow. Margaret wants to spend the morning with the boys first. After they left, Maylene sagged against the sofa, exhausted. Colt sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. We survived, he said. Barely. But we did it together. She looked at him, at this hard man who'd somehow become her partner, her ally, maybe something more. Colt, what Silas said about my past, I meant what I said. I don't care about your past. I care about who you are now. And now you're brave and strong and you love my boys like they're yours. They are mine, Maylene said fiercely, in every way that matters. I know. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from you, from any of us. They sat in the quiet library, hands joined, and Maylene felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. It was too soon for that. But safety, maybe. The knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard footsteps in the hall, a soft knock on her door. Come in. Thomas appeared, clutching his pillow. Can I sleep here? I don't want to be alone. Of course. She pulled back the covers, and he climbed in beside her, small and warm and trusting. Maylene, he whispered, can I call you Ma? Not instead of my real Ma, but because you feel like one too? Her throat went tight. If you want to. I want to. She held him close, this broken boy who was slowly becoming whole, and let herself believe just for a moment that maybe she belonged here after all. Maybe this strange, fractured family could actually work. Maybe she'd finally found a place where her past didn't matter more than her present. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she could still hear Silas's voice. This isn't over. And she knew, with cold certainty, that he was right. 3 weeks passed like a held breath. The Burkes returned east, taking Morrison with them, but leaving behind something unexpected, tentative acceptance, or at least the promise of it. Margaret wrote twice, asking about the boys, and her letters were warmer than Maylene had dared hope. Charles hadn't written at all, but he'd shaken Colt's hand before leaving, and that felt like progress. Silas disappeared back to wherever he'd come from, but Maylene couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting. She caught herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, lying awake at night listening to the house settle and wondering if every creak was something more sinister. Colt noticed. Of course he did. "You're not sleeping," he said one morning at breakfast, the boys still upstairs with their tutor. "I'm fine." "You're not." He set down his coffee cup. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about. Silas left, the Burkes backed down. Everything's fine." Maylene. She looked at him, at this man who'd become so much more than just the stranger who'd offered her shelter. Somewhere in the chaos of the past month, she'd started caring about him in ways that terrified her. Ways that made her vulnerable. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted quietly. "For Silas to come back with evidence or lies or something that'll destroy everything we've built. I can't shake the feeling that this is temporary, that I'm going to lose it all." "You're not going to lose anything. You can't promise that." "Watch me." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I sent telegrams to San Francisco, to people I trust. They're looking into Whitmore, finding out exactly what he did, what laws he broke. If he comes back, we'll be ready." "Colt, you don't have to "Yes, I do. You're my wife. Those boys call you Ma. This is your home now, and I'll be damned if I let some bastard from your past take that away." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her chest tight. "Why are you doing this? Fighting for me like this?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Because you matter. To the boys. To this house. To—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "To you?" she asked softly. "Yeah, to me." He met her eyes, and what she saw there made her heart stutter. "I didn't plan on this, Maylene. Didn't plan on caring about you, but somewhere between that first night and now, you stopped being just a solution to my problems and started being—" "What?" "Everything," he said roughly. "You're everything." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Maylene wanted to say them back, wanted to tell him that he'd become her anchor, her safe harbor, her home. But before she could find the courage, Mrs. Grady bustled in with more coffee, and the moment shattered. Colt pulled his hand back, clearing his throat. "I have to ride out to the north pasture. Fence needs mending. I'll be back by dinner." "All right." He stood, hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was quick, almost casual, but it felt like a promise. Then he was gone, and Maylene sat alone with her cooling coffee and the ghost of his touch on her skin. The day passed in its usual rhythm. Maylene worked with Mrs. Grady on the house, spent time with the boys when their lessons ended, rode out to the creek where the water ran clear and cold. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. That should have been her first warning. She was in the kitchen helping prepare dinner when Danny Pruitt came running in, his face pale. "Mrs. Mercer, there's a man at the gate. Says he needs to speak with you. Says it's urgent." Maylene's stomach dropped. "What man?" "Didn't give his name, but he's dressed fancy, talks like he's from back east." "Silas." "Where's Colt?" "Still out with Cole. Won't be back for another hour at least." Maylene wiped her hands on her apron, her mind racing. She could send Danny away with a message, could hide in the house until Colt returned. But that was running, and she'd promised herself she was done running. "Tell him I'll meet him on the front porch, not inside." "Ma'am, I don't think it—" "It's fine, Danny. Just stay close, all right?" He nodded reluctantly and headed back out. Mrs. Grady grabbed Maylene's arm. "You don't have to do this," the older woman said. "Wait for Mr. Mercer." "No, this is my fight. I need to face it." She walked to the front door, straightening her spine, lifting her chin. Through the window, she could see Silas waiting by the gate, looking perfectly at ease like he belonged there. Rage flared hot in her chest, burning away the fear. She stepped onto the porch, and his smile widened. Mrs. Mercer. How lovely to see you again. What do you want, Silas? Can a man pay a friendly visit? We both know you're not here to be friendly. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. True enough. I'm here to make you an offer. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. He moved closer to the porch steps, but didn't climb them, smart enough to know that Danny was watching from the barn, hand probably on his rifle. I want what you stole from me, with interest, $500. I don't have $500. No, but your husband does, and more besides. Silas's eyes were cold, calculating. Pay me what you owe, and I disappear. Forever. You never have to worry about me showing up again. Never have to wonder if today's the day I tell the whole territory about your past. The whole territory already knows. You made sure of that. The Burkes know, a handful of people at that delightful little gathering. But the good people of Deed Ridge, the ranchers Colt does business with, the society ladies who might invite you to tea someday. He smiled. They don't know yet, but they could. I have friends in the newspaper business. One article and your reputation, such as it is, would be completely destroyed. Maylene's hands clenched into fists. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a business transaction, $500 for my silence. Seems fair, considering what you took from me. What I took? You kept me locked up for 3 years. You took everything I earned and gave me nothing. I gave you food and shelter, a roof over your head. Not so different from what you have now, is it? His voice turned cruel. Except this time you're pretending to be respectable. This time you've got children calling you mother and a husband who thinks you're something more than what you are. Get off my property, Maylene's voice was shaking with rage. Get off my property before I have Danny shoot you for trespassing. $500, Maylene. You have 3 days to get it. After that, I start talking to reporters. He tipped his hat, that smile never wavering. Give my regards to your husband. He walked back to his horse, mounted up, and rode away like he had all the time in the world. Maylene stood frozen on the porch, watching him disappear down the road, and felt everything she'd built start to crumble. She didn't tell Colt when he came home. She meant to. Stood in the hallway while he washed up for dinner, words forming and dying on her tongue. But every time she tried to speak, she saw the look on his face when Silas had revealed her past. Saw the pause before he'd answered whether he would have married her if he'd known. He cared about her now. Maybe even loved her. But $500 was a fortune, and asking him to pay it felt like admitting Silas was right. That she was just using Colt for his money, his protection, his name. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and tried to think of a way out. She had maybe $20 to her name, saved from the pittance the school board had paid her. The rest of her money, what little she'd managed to take from Silas, had gone to rent and food during those lean months before Colt. $20 against $500. It might as well have been nothing. She could ask the Burkes for help, but they just barely accepted her. Asking for money would confirm every suspicion Charles had harbored about her motives. She could try to find work in town, but what could she possibly do that would earn that much money in 3 days? The only option was to tell Colt everything and hope he'd help. Hope he'd believe her. Hope he wouldn't see this as exactly what it looked like, a woman with a sordid past bringing her problems into his life. But before she could make that choice, fate made it for her. The next morning, Maylene was hanging laundry when James came running from the house, a newspaper clutched in his hand. Ma, look. She took the paper, and her blood turned to ice. The headline screamed in bold type, Rancher's Bride from Brothel to Respectable Society? Below it was an article, written with just enough careful wording to avoid outright libel, detailing her past in San Francisco. The writer, who had clearly been fed information by Silas, painted her as a scheming woman who'd seduced the wealthy Colt Mercer while his wife's grave was barely cold. What's a brothel? James asked innocently. Maylene's hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. James, go inside. Find Mrs. Grady. But now, sweetheart, please. He ran off, and Maylene sank onto the porch steps, the newspaper crumpling in her grip. 3 days, Silas had said. He'd given her 3 days. But he'd published the article immediately, ensuring that even if she paid him, the damage was already done. She'd lost. He'd won. Colt found her there 20 minutes later, still holding the paper, tears streaming down her face. Maylene? He took the newspaper, read it, and his expression went dark as a thunderstorm. When did this happen? Yesterday. He came here while you were at the North Pasture, demanded $500 or he'd talk to reporters. She laughed bitterly. I guess he decided to skip the waiting period. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to think I was using you for your money, didn't want you to have to choose between paying blackmail and protecting your reputation. She stood up, wiping her face. This is my fault. My past. I brought this on us. No. Colt's voice was hard. Whitmore did this. Not you. But if I hadn't been what I was, if I hadn't run from San Francisco, if I hadn't married you, then my boys wouldn't be happy. This house wouldn't feel like home. I wouldn't have... He stopped, jaw working. Wouldn't have what? I wouldn't have fallen in love with you, damn it! The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, this hard, guarded man who'd just cracked himself open and shown her the truth inside. You love me? She whispered. Yes, I love you. I've been trying not to, trying to keep this just business, just practical. But you made that impossible. He moved closer, cupping her face in his rough hands. You walked into my life and brought it back from the dead. You gave my boys their childhood back. You made me remember what it feels like to want something beyond just surviving. Colt. So I don't care what's in that newspaper. I don't care what Whitmore says or what the town thinks. You're mine and I'm yours, and nothing's going to change that. The town will turn on you. Your business partners will. Let them. I've got enough land, enough money, enough strength to weather whatever comes. What I can't weather is losing you. His thumbs wiped away her tears. So we're not running. We're not hiding. We're standing together and daring anyone to come at us. You're crazy, she said, but her voice was full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Probably. But I've been crazy since the night I walked into that schoolhouse and offered to marry a woman I'd never met. He pressed his forehead to hers. Say it back. What? Say you love me. I know you do. I can see it in the way you look at me, the way you fight for this family. Say it. I love you, Maylene whispered. I've loved you since the first time you smiled at the boys, since the first time you called this our home instead of just yours. Since... He kissed her, cutting off the words, and it was nothing like the careful, controlled man she'd married. It was desperate and fierce and full of everything they'd been holding back for weeks. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it, and for a moment nothing else mattered. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. Now we handle Whitmore, he said. How? The same way we've handled everything else. Together. Cole arrived an hour later with news that made Maylene's chest loosen for the first time since she'd seen that newspaper. Got the telegrams back from San Francisco, he said, handing Colt a stack of papers. Your friends were thorough. Colt read through them, his expression getting darker with each page. Whitmore ran 3 brothels, all operating without proper licenses. Multiple complaints from families whose daughters went missing, evidence of human trafficking, extortion, bribery of local officials. He looked up. There's an active warrant for his arrest in California. He's a fugitive? Maylene asked. Has been for 6 months. Apparently he fled just ahead of a raid. Cole grinned. The federal marshals have been looking for him. Then we tell them where he is, Colt said. Already did. They're sending someone from the territorial office. Should be here by tomorrow. Maylene felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. You did this for me. I told you I'd protect you, Colt said simply. I meant it. That evening, Silas showed up at the ranch again, probably expecting Maylene to be broken, desperate, ready to pay anything to make him go away. Instead, he found Colt waiting on the porch, calm and still as deep water. Mr. Mercer, I assume your lovely wife told you about our conversation. She did. Then you know what I want. $500, and I disappear. See? That's where we have a problem. Colt descended the steps slowly, and something in his movement made Silas step back. Because I don't negotiate with criminals. Criminals? I'm a businessman. You're a human trafficker. You're wanted in California on 14 counts, including kidnapping, extortion, and operating illegal establishments. There's a federal warrant with your name on it." Silas's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Colt pulled the telegrams from his pocket. "Want to read them yourself? Or maybe you'd rather wait for the marshal who's arriving tomorrow morning." For a long moment, Silas just stared, his composure cracking. Then his hand moved toward his jacket, and Colt was on him before Maylene could even process what was happening. The fight was brutal and short. Silas got one punch in before Colt had him on the ground, arm twisted behind his back, face pressed into the dirt. Danny came running from the barn, rifle ready, and Cole appeared from the stable. "You broke my arm," Silas gasped. "Not yet, but keep struggling and I will." Colt's voice was perfectly calm, like he was discussing the weather. "Cole, get some rope. They tied Silas up and locked him in the tack room, and Maylene stood on the porch watching it all with a strange sense of unreality. It was over. Just like that. The man who'd controlled her life for 3 years, who'd haunted her nightmares, who'd threatened everything she loved, defeated in less than 5 minutes by a cowboy who loved her. That night, after the boys were asleep and Silas was secured under Danny's watch, Maylene found Colt in the library. He was standing by the window looking out at the dark land, and she could see the tension still coiled in his shoulders. "Hey," she said softly. He turned, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Hey yourself. Thank you for everything. For believing me, for protecting me, for— You don't have to thank me. This is what you do when you love someone. You fight for them." She crossed to him, sliding her arms around his waist, and he held her close. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing together, and Maylene felt something inside her finally relax. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "The marshal takes Whitmore. He goes back to San Francisco to stand trial. We never have to think about him again." "And the newspaper article? Will be yesterday's news in a week. People talk, Maylene, but they also forget, especially when there's nothing more to say." He pulled back to look at her. "But even if they don't forget, even if this follows us forever, I don't care. I love you. That's all that matters. The boys might hear things, at school, around town. Then we teach them the truth. That their ma had a hard life before she found us. That she's the bravest person we know. That she's ours and we're hers, and nobody gets to change that." Maylene felt tears slip down her cheeks, but these were good tears. Healing tears. "How did I get this lucky?" "Lucky? You married a broken widower with 2 traumatized children in a house full of ghosts. Best decision I ever made." He laughed, and the sound filled the room, chasing away the last shadows. "Come on, let's go to bed." They walked upstairs together, hands linked, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Maylene felt safe. Really, truly safe. The marshal arrived as promised the next morning, a stern woman named Catherine Pierce, who took one look at Silas and shook her head. "Been chasing you for months, Whitmore. Should have known you'd turn up somewhere causing trouble." "This is a mistake," Silas said desperately. "I'm a legitimate businessman. These people are lying." "Save it for the judge." Marshal Pierce hauled him to his feet. "You're going back to California to face charges. If you're lucky, you'll only get 10 years. As they led him away, Silas looked back at Maylene one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes," Maylene said quietly. "It is." She watched the wagon disappear down the road, Colt's arm around her shoulders, and felt the weight of the past finally lift. Silas was gone. The Burkes had accepted her. The boys were happy and healing, and Colt loved her, had fought for her, protected her, stood beside her when everything fell apart. "You all right?" Colt asked. "Yeah, I really am." Thomas and James came running from the house, and Thomas crashed into Maylene's legs, hugging her tight. "Is the bad man gone?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart. He's gone." "Good." Thomas looked up at her with those solemn eyes. "I was scared he'd take you away." "Never. I'm not going anywhere." She knelt down, gathering both boys close. "You're stuck with me." "Promise?" James asked. "I promise." Colt crouched beside them, and they formed a circle there in the dirt. This strange, broken, beautiful family that had somehow found each other. And Maylene thought about the girl she'd been in San Francisco, terrified and alone, certain she'd never escape. If she could see herself now, she wouldn't believe it. But it was real. All of it. The love, the safety, the home she'd found in the last place she'd expected. "Come on," Colt said, standing and pulling them all to their feet. "Mrs. Grady's making pancakes. Race you to the kitchen." The boys took off running, shouting and laughing, and Maylene started to follow. But Colt caught her hand, pulling her back for one more kiss, slow and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too." They walked to the house together, and through the windows Maylene could see Mrs. Grady bustling around the kitchen, could hear the boys arguing about who'd won the race, could smell coffee and pancakes and home. This was hers now. All of it. Not because she'd schemed or manipulated or used anyone, but because she'd been brave enough to say yes when Colt offered her a chance. Brave enough to love children who weren't hers by blood. Brave enough to fight for a family that had started as nothing more than a desperate arrangement. The town would talk. Some people would always see her as the Chinese woman from a brothel who'd married above her station. But let them talk. She had Colt, she had the boys, she had a home that felt like it had been waiting for her all along. She had everything, and she was never letting go. The weeks that followed Silas's arrest should have been peaceful, but peace turned out to be harder than Maylene expected. Not because of external threats, those had been dealt with, but because healing was messier than anyone wanted to admit. The town did talk, just like Colt had predicted. Maylene heard the whispers when she went to the general store, saw the way some women clutched their children closer when she passed. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, actually crossed the street to avoid her. But there were surprises too. Sarah Fletcher, Tommy's mother from the schoolhouse, stopped her outside the church one Sunday. "My Tommy says you were the best teacher he ever had," Sarah said. "Says you made him feel smart even when he got things wrong." Maylene felt her throat tighten. "He's a good boy." "He is. And you're a good woman, no matter what some folks say." Sarah squeezed her arm. "Welcome to Deedridge, Mrs. Mercer, properly this time." It was a small gesture, but it mattered. One voice of acceptance and a chorus of judgment. Maylene held on to it like a lifeline. At home, things were both better and worse. The boys had started calling her Ma without hesitation now, and the sound of it still made her chest ache in the best way. But Thomas's nightmares got worse before they got better. Apparently feeling safe enough to grieve meant feeling safe enough to fall apart. He'd wake up screaming, and Maylene would rush to his room, finding him tangled in sheets, calling for his mother. "I'm here," she'd say, holding him. "I'm right here." "But you're not her," he'd sob. "You're not Ma, my real Ma." And that hurt, even though Maylene understood it, even though she knew he needed to say it, needed to acknowledge that she wasn't Elizabeth and never would be. "I know, sweetheart. I know I'm not her. But I love you just as much. Is that okay?" He'd nod against her shoulder, and she'd stay until he fell back asleep, then return to her own room where Colt would be waiting, concerned and helpless. "He doesn't mean it," Colt would say. "I know. But it's still true. I'm not her. You're you. That's enough." But some nights it didn't feel like enough. Some nights Maylene lay awake wondering if she'd ever be anything more than a poor substitute for the woman these people had really loved. 3 months after Silas's arrest, a letter came from Margaret Burke. Maylene almost didn't open it, afraid of what it might say, but Colt encouraged her to read it. The letter was surprisingly warm. Margaret wrote about how she and Charles had been talking, really talking, about Elizabeth and grief and what the boys needed. She admitted they'd been wrong to try to take the children, wrong to judge Maylene so harshly. And then, at the end, she wrote something that made Maylene's hands shake. "Elizabeth would have liked you, I think. She always said the strongest people were the ones who'd survived the worst things. You survived, Maylene, you're still surviving. That takes a kind of courage my daughter would have recognized and respected. Take care of our boys, take care of Colt, and please let us visit again soon. We'd like to get to know you properly." "She called you by your name," Colt said, reading over her shoulder. "Not that woman or the Chinese girl. Your name." I noticed. That's progress. It was. But progress still felt fragile, like something that could shatter if she breathed wrong. The real breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Maylene was in Elizabeth's garden. She'd stopped thinking of it that way, had started just calling it the garden, pulling weeds and trying to coax the roses back to their former glory. Thomas found her there, dirt on his knees, a serious expression on his face. "Ma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think people can have two Ma's?" Maylene sat back on her heels, giving him her full attention. "What do you mean?" "Like, I had Ma, Elizabeth. She was my first Ma, and I loved her so much." His voice wobbled but held. "But now I have you, and I love you too. Does that mean I'm forgetting her?" "Oh, Thomas." Maylene pulled him close, not caring about the dirt. "No, sweetheart. Love doesn't work like that. Your heart's not a pie where loving me means there's less left for her. It's more like a garden." "A garden?" "Yeah, see these roses? They were your first Ma's favorite, but look." She pointed to the wildflowers she'd planted along the edges, bright yellow and purple against the red roses. "These are new. I planted them. But they don't make the roses less beautiful, do they?" "No. They just make the garden bigger, better, more full of life." She cupped his face in her hands. "That's what love does. It grows. It makes room. You can love her and love me, and that's not just okay. It's beautiful." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "I like the wildflowers." "Yeah?" "Yeah, they're pretty, different from the roses, but still pretty." He looked up at her with those two wise eyes. "Like you're different from Ma Elizabeth, but still good." Maylene felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You're a smart kid, you know that?" "James says I'm annoying." "You can be both." He grinned, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. This broken boy learning how to be whole again, learning that loving two mothers didn't make him disloyal to either one. That evening at dinner, James cleared his throat importantly. "Ma Maylene, can you teach me to write Chinese letters?" It was the first time he'd called her Ma with her name attached, making it clear and specific and chosen. Maylene's chest went tight. "Of course. Why do you want to learn?" "Because it's part of you, and you're part of us now, so I should know it." Colt was watching from across the table, and the look in his eyes made Maylene's breath catch. Pride, yes, but also something deeper. A kind of wonder that they'd somehow managed to build this. A family that honored its past while making space for its future. After dinner, Maylene showed James the basic strokes, how to hold the brush, how each character told a story. Thomas wanted to learn too, and soon both boys were bent over paper, tongues poking out in concentration, making marks that looked nothing like proper characters but everything like love. "You're good with them," Mrs. Grady said from the doorway. "They're good kids. They are now, but they weren't for a while there. They were just empty." Mrs. Grady came into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. "I judge you wrong, Mrs. Mercer. When you first came here, I thought you were just using Mr. Mercer for his money. Thought you couldn't possibly care about those boys or this house or any of it." "I don't blame you for thinking that." "Maybe not, but I was still wrong. You love them, really love them. I can see it in everything you do." She paused. "Mrs. Elizabeth would be grateful, I think, that her boys have someone who cares about them this much." It was the first time Mrs. Grady had compared her favorably to Elizabeth, and Maylene didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep making this house feel like a home again." That night, after the boys were asleep, Maylene found Colt in their bedroom, not his room or her room anymore, but theirs. They'd made that transition slowly over the past month, first sharing a bed occasionally, then most nights, then finally moving all of Maylene's things into the master bedroom where they belonged. He was sitting on the edge of the bed staring at a photograph of Elizabeth. Maylene had learned not to be jealous of these moments. They were necessary, a way of saying goodbye and hello at the same time. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About her?" "About all of it. About how a year ago I couldn't imagine surviving this. Couldn't imagine the boys ever being happy again. Couldn't imagine wanting anything beyond just making it through each day." He set the photograph back on the nightstand. It had stayed there, and Maylene had never asked him to move it. "And now? Now I'm happy. Really, truly happy. And that feels like a betrayal sometimes." Maylene sat beside him, taking his hand. It's not. Being happy doesn't mean you didn't love her, doesn't mean you've forgotten. I know that up here. He tapped his head. But here, he pressed his hand to his chest. Here, it still feels wrong sometimes, like I'm supposed to be miserable forever to prove she mattered. She did matter. She'll always matter. But Colt, she wouldn't want you to be miserable. She'd want you to live, to love, to give those boys a full life, not one shadowed by grief. How do you know? Because I know what it's like to survive something terrible. And when you survive, when you claw your way back to something like happiness, you don't want the people you love to suffer in your name. You want them to live big and love hard and grab every bit of joy they can find. He pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of running from happiness because I don't think I deserve it. You deserve everything, Maylene, everything good this world has to offer. So do you. They sat like that for a while, holding each other, and Maylene thought about how strange life was. How you could lose everything and find everything in the span of a few months. How grief and joy could exist in the same space, same moment, same heart. The next Sunday, the whole family went to church together. It was Maylene's first time attending in Deadridge. She'd been too afraid of the stares, the whispers, the judgment. But Colt insisted. We're not hiding anymore, he said. Not from anyone. So they went, the four of them, dressed in their best clothes. And yes, people stared. Yes, conversation stopped when they walked in. But Sarah Fletcher saved them a seat, and the Reverend's wife smiled at Maylene, and Thomas held her hand the entire service like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Afterward, as they were leaving, Mrs. Henderson approached. Maylene braced herself for confrontation, but the banker's wife just said stiffly, "Your dress is very becoming, Mrs. Mercer." It wasn't much, but it was something, a crack in the wall of judgment. "Thank you," Maylene said. "Your hat is lovely." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, then Mrs. Henderson nodded and walked away. Progress, Maylene thought. Slow and painful and barely noticeable, but still progress. On the ride home, James asked, "Why do people treat you different?" "Because I'm Chinese, because I'm not from here, because they don't know me yet." "That's stupid." "James," Colt said warningly. "But it is. Ma's the best. She helps me with my homework and doesn't get mad when I make mistakes. She tells good stories and she's teaching us Chinese and she makes Pa smile. Who cares where she came from?" "Some people care about the wrong things," Maylene said quietly. "But the people who matter, they care about what's real, about who you are, not where you started." "Do we matter?" Thomas asked. "You matter most of all." Summer came, and with it the Burkes returned for a week-long visit. But this time it was different. This time Margaret brought gifts for Maylene, a beautiful shawl, a book of poetry, small gestures that said, "I see you, I accept you, you belong here." Charles was still reserved, still uncertain, but he taught James how to fish and let Thomas climb on his back, and that felt like acceptance too. On their last evening, Margaret asked to speak with Maylene alone. They walked in the garden together, surrounded by roses and wildflowers and the smell of approaching rain. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said. "A real one, not just words in a letter." "You don't?" "I do. When we first met, I saw you as a threat, someone trying to replace my daughter, trying to steal her life. I was cruel, unkind, and I'm sorry. You were grieving, I understand. Maybe, but that's not an excuse." Margaret stopped by Elizabeth's roses, touching a bloom gently. "Elizabeth used to tell me that family wasn't just blood. She'd say, 'Family is who shows up, Mama, who stays when things get hard.' I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was just being idealistic. And now? Now I see that you've shown up for my grandsons every single day. You've stayed through the hard parts. You've loved them when they were impossible to love. You've given them back their childhood." Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. "That makes you family, Maylene, not instead of Elizabeth." Alongside her. Maylene's throat was too tight to speak, so she just nodded. "The boys call you Ma now," Margaret continued, "and I want you to know, I'm glad. I'm glad they have you. I'm glad Colt has you. You've healed things I thought were broken beyond repair. I didn't do it alone. No, but you did the hardest part. You stayed when it would have been easier to run." That night, after the Burkes had gone to bed and the boys were asleep, Maylene stood on the porch with Colt, watching lightning flash on the horizon. Storm's coming, he said. We've weathered worse. He laughed, pulling her against his side. Yeah, we have. Colt? Do you ever regret it? Marrying me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, I regret that I didn't meet you sooner, that you had to go through hell to get here, that I can't erase every bad thing that ever happened to you. He turned her to face him. But marrying you? That's the best decision I ever made besides having those boys. Even with all the complications? Especially with them. Easy doesn't mean good, Maylene. We fought for this. We built it from nothing. That makes it stronger than anything that came easy ever could be. The storm broke then, rain pouring down in sheets, and they ran for the house, laughing like children. Inside, they found Thomas standing at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. I had a bad dream, he said. Come here, baby. Maylene climbed the stairs and picked him up. He was getting too big for it, really, but sometimes he still needed it. What did you dream about? That you left, that you went away and didn't come back. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. But what if... No, what ifs? I'm here. I'm staying. This is my home now, and you're my boy. Nothing's going to change that. Colt joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and James appeared from his room, drawn by the voices. They stood there in the hallway, this family that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, and Maylene felt something settle deep in her bones. This was what home felt like. Not a place, but people. Not perfection, but presence. The willingness to show up, day after day, even when it was hard. 3 years later, Maylene stood in the same garden, her hands dirty from planting, and watched the boys race their horses across the field. They were 11 and 13 now, growing like weeds, becoming more themselves every day. James wanted to be a lawyer, spent hours reading law books Colt ordered from back east. Thomas had discovered a talent for drawing and filled notebooks with sketches of the ranch, the horses, the land he loved. They still missed their first mother. Sometimes they'd mention her casually, Ma Elizabeth used to make cookies like this, or remember when Ma Elizabeth took us to the creek? And Maylene had learned not to flinch. Those memories were precious, to be honored, not erased. But they had new memories too. Memories of Maylene teaching them to write Chinese, of family trips to San Francisco where she showed them the city that had once imprisoned her but couldn't anymore. Memories of Colt teaching them to ranch, to ride, to stand up for what mattered. The Burkes came twice a year now, and Margaret had become something like a friend. They wrote letters back and forth, sharing news about the boys, about life, about everything and nothing. The town had slowly, grudgingly accepted Maylene. She'd started teaching again, this time as a private tutor for ranch families whose children couldn't make it to town school. The work was satisfying, purposeful, and the parents paid her fairly. More than fairly, once word got around that their children actually learned from her. Mrs. Henderson had even invited her to tea once, though it had been awkward as hell and they'd run out of things to say after 15 minutes. But it was something. Colt came up behind her now, sliding his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him. What are you thinking about? He asked. How far we've come, how different everything is. Better different? Much better. She turned in his arms. Do you ever think about that first night when you showed up at the schoolhouse? All the time. I think about how terrified you looked, how brave you were anyway, how you said yes even though you had no reason to trust me. I trusted my instincts. They said you were a good man who needed help. Were they right? Mostly, she grinned. You're stubborn as hell, and you work too hard, and sometimes you forget to tell me you love me. I love you. I know, but it's nice to hear. I love you, he said again, slower. I love you for saying yes that night. I love you for being brave enough to stay. I love you for giving my boys their childhood back and giving me a reason to believe in second chances. Third chances in my case. However many it takes. He kissed her forehead. The boys asked me something this morning. What? They could call you just Ma, not Ma Maylene, just Ma. He paused. I told them they should ask you. Maylene's eyes stung. They'd been calling her Ma Maylene for 3 years, making space for Elizabeth even in their language. But this was them saying she'd earned her place fully. What do you think? She asked. I think you're their mother in every way that matters. I think Elizabeth would want them to have that, to have you fully, without reservation." He smiled. "But it's your choice." That evening at dinner, James cleared his throat. "Ma Maylene, we wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Can we just call you Ma? I mean, if that's okay. We love you and you're our Ma, and it feels weird to keep adding your name like you're not really ours." Thomas nodded eagerly. "You're ours, and we're yours, right?" Maylene looked at these boys, young men really, who'd been broken when she met them and were now whole. Who'd taught her that family wasn't just blood or even choice, but commitment. The decision to keep showing up, keep loving, keep trying. "Yes," she said, "I'm yours and you're mine. And you can call me whatever feels right to you." "So just Ma?" James pressed. "Just Ma." The joy on their faces made everything worth it. Every hard day, every moment of doubt, every time she'd wondered if she was enough. All of it worth it for this moment. Later, when the boys were in bed and the house was quiet, Maylene walked through the rooms that had once felt like a museum. Now they were lived in, loved in, full of noise and mess and life. She stopped at a photograph of Elizabeth, the one that still sat on the nightstand. "Thank you," she whispered to the woman in the frame, "for loving them first, for showing them what a good mother looks like, for making Colt the kind of man who could love again." She didn't expect an answer, didn't need one, but she felt a kind of peace, like Elizabeth's ghost had finally stopped haunting these halls and had instead become a blessing, a foundation on which new things could grow. Colt found her there, staring at his first wife's picture, and instead of being jealous or uncomfortable, he just wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "What?" "Love isn't finite. It doesn't run out. I loved Elizabeth with everything I had, and I thought when she died, that was it. I'd used up my quota of love and there'd never be more." He turned her around. "But then you walked into my life and I learned I was wrong. Love grows, it expands, it makes room." "Like a garden," Maylene said, remembering her conversation with Thomas. "Exactly like a garden. Elizabeth was the roses, beautiful, classic, the foundation of everything. And you're the wildflowers, unexpected, resilient, bringing color to places that were dark." He smiled. "Together, you've made this family more than it ever could have been with just one." "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I'm still a cowboy, not a poet." She laughed and pulled him close, and they stood in the quiet house, two people who'd been broken and somehow found a way to be whole together. Years from now, Maylene would look back on this time and understand it for what it was. The moment she stopped running from happiness and started believing she deserved it. The moment she accepted that her past didn't define her future. The moment she realized that home wasn't a place you were born into, but something you built with your own hands, one choice at a time. She'd never be Elizabeth, and that was okay. She didn't need to be. She just needed to be herself, flawed, fierce, still learning how to believe she was enough. And in this house, with this man, with these boys who called her Ma, she was more than enough. She was home. The ranch continued its rhythms. Cattle were born, crops were planted, seasons changed. The boys grew taller, smarter, more themselves. Colt's hair went gray at the temples, and Maylene found her first wrinkle and didn't mind it. They weathered droughts and good years, arguments and reconciliations, all the small storms that make up a life. 10 years after that first night in the schoolhouse, James left for law school back east. He hugged Maylene tight before he got on the train and said, "Thank you for teaching me that where you start doesn't determine where you finish." "You taught me that too," she said. Thomas stayed, taking over more and more of the ranch work, discovering he had a gift for breeding horses. He married a girl from town, Sarah Fletcher's daughter, as it turned out, and they built a house on the north part of the property. And when they had their first baby, a daughter with dark hair and curious eyes, they asked Maylene and Colt to be grandparents in truth, not just in name. The Burkes passed away within months of each other, worn out by age and grief, but they died knowing their grandsons were loved and happy. They left everything to the boys, with a special provision in the will, a sum set aside for Maylene, with a note that said simply, "Thank you for giving us our family back." Maylene cried when the lawyer read it. Cried for the relationship she'd thought impossible, for the acceptance she'd never expected, for the proof that people could change, could grow, could learn to love what they'd once feared. And through it all, she and Colt built a life that was messy and beautiful and real. They fought sometimes, about money, about the boys, about stupid things that didn't matter. But they always came back together, always remembered that they were on the same side. Because at the end of the day, that's what marriage was. Not the romance of that first kiss, not the drama of fighting for each other, but the quiet decision to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. On their 25th anniversary, Colt took Maylene back to the schoolhouse where they'd first met. It had been abandoned for years, windows broken, roof sagging, but it still stood. "You remember that night?" he asked. "Every second of it. I was so scared." "Me too." "You were scared?" "Terrified. I was asking a stranger to save my family. Didn't know if you'd say yes. Didn't know if I was making the biggest mistake of my life." He smiled. "Turns out it was the best decision I ever made. Even with all the trouble I brought? Especially because of it. Easy doesn't build character, Maylene. Struggle does. And we struggled together, which made us stronger than we ever could have been apart." She leaned against him, looking at the schoolhouse that had been her prison and her salvation all at once. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still do it?" "In a heartbeat. Would you?" She thought about it. Thought about the fear, the pain, the judgment, the fights. Thought about Thomas's nightmares and James's anger and the way the town had treated her. Thought about Silas and the Burkes and every hard moment that had followed her yes. And then she thought about family dinners filled with laughter, about teaching the boys to write Chinese, about Colt's arms around her in the dark, about becoming a grandmother, about building something real and lasting from nothing but desperation and hope. "Yes," she said. "I'd do it all again, every hard moment, because they led me here." To a broken-down schoolhouse? To you, to them, to home. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 25 years of love and life and learning. And Maylene thought about that scared Chinese girl who'd stood in this very building and said yes to a stranger's crazy proposal. She'd been so afraid, so certain she was making a mistake, so sure that happiness was for other people, not girls with her history, her scars, her shame. But she'd been wrong. Happiness wasn't something you were born deserving. It was something you built, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. It was messy and hard, and it required more courage than running ever did. But it was worth it. Every second of it was worth it. They walked back to the wagon, hands linked, and headed home to the ranch where their family waited. Where dinner would be loud and chaotic with grandchildren running around and Thomas arguing good-naturedly with his wife and the dog barking for scraps. Where life was full and rich and real. Where a poor Chinese immigrant and a grief-stricken cowboy had built something that would outlast them both. Not perfection, but something better. A home forged by choice, strengthened by struggle, and held together by the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. That was the real story. Not the romance of it, though, that was there too. But the grit underneath, the daily decision to stay, to fight, to love, even when it hurt. Because in the end, that's what makes a family. Not blood, not convenience, not even love in the abstract, but presence, commitment. The willingness to show up day after day and say, "I'm here. I'm staying. You're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing's going to change that." Maylene had learned that the hard way. But then again, the best lessons usually came hard. She was done running now, done hiding, done believing she wasn't enough. She was home. And home was wherever these people were. The man beside her. The boys who'd become men. The family they'd built from broken pieces and sheer stubbornness. This was her story. Not a tragedy about a girl from a brothel, but a triumph about a woman who refused to let her past define her future. Who said yes when it would have been safer to say no. Who stayed when running would have been easier. Who loved when her heart had every reason to stay closed. And who built a life worth living, one choice at a time. That was the real magic. Not that she'd escaped her past, but that she'd integrated it, used it. Let it make her stronger instead of letting it break her. The Chinese girl and the cowboy. The broken family and the woman brave enough to help fix it. The impossible arrangement that became something real. This was their story. And it was just beginning.